Hi everyone, this is our last chapter in Module 2, and this is a sequel, if you will, to what we discussed in Chapter 6. This is an expansion of motivation theory, and in this chapter, what we're actually going to look at is some of the cognitive processes that individuals undergo when they are actually motivated. So we're kind of going to go into the minds of individuals and really understand from a cognitive psychological approach the processes that people use to really come to the point of being motivated. And we're going to actually look at three different processes or motivational processes. That's equity theory, expectancy theory, and goal setting theory. Well, the first motivation theory we're going to look at is equity theory, and it's a model of motivation, it says here, that explains how people strive for fairness and justice in social exchanges or give and take relationships. If you take your mind back to chapter 6, where we talked about job satisfaction, we talked about the fact that when people perceived that they were being treated fairly, that led to increased job satisfaction. This is what it's speaking about here. Equity is all about fairness in the way that I am treated in terms of my social exchange in the organization. And it's really important to understand at this juncture that this fairness is a perceived fairness. So if we go back to our chapter in chapter 4 that talked about perception, you realize again that because perception is a cognitive process that is influenced highly by the individual, by their specific environment, that the idiosyncrasies of an individual or their environment can lead to very different perceptions and very different decisions based on that perception. So of course, this influences equity theory as well. So what I might perceive as being fair, you may not perceive as being fair. And it's important for managers to clearly understand that equity theory is not necessarily based on some type of objective assessment or benchmark, but more so on how individuals in the organization perceive their exchanges in terms of its fairness. In assessing fairness, we often look at two elements. One is the input. And what's input? It's, an employee's input, it says here, is for which he expects a just reward, including its education, training, skills, creativity, seniority, age, personality traits, ethics, and anything that we think we are actually giving to the organization or we bring to the table in the organization in our inputs. And we expect to be rewarded justly so or get a return for bringing these inputs. So the first element that we consider is our inputs. What are we bringing to the table? The second element is the outcome or the outputs. On the outcome side, the organization, it says, provides such things as pay and bonuses, fringe benefits, assignments, job security, promotion. So I'm asking myself, for all these inputs that are brought in here, what am I getting in return? What type of reward am I seeing? So we look at our inputs and we look at our outputs. So how do we use these two elements to assess equity, to assess fairness? So what do we do with these outcomes and inputs? What do we do is we look at the ratio of outcome to inputs for ourselves, and we then compare that to those of our colleagues or those around us. And we see whether or not there is similarities in these ratios. So for example, if I and my colleague, we have the same amount of experience in the firm, the same level of education, the same type of expertise and training, right? Meaning we have essentially the same inputs, but his or her output is greater than mine, then I will see that as being an inequity there. And in fact, that's what we call a negative inequity, meaning that I am basically being taken advantage of in terms of not getting the same level of output as my colleague. So I won't see that as being very fair. But my colleague might actually see that inequity as being positive because in essence they're getting paid more, they're getting greater outcomes for the same level of inputs that I have. So you can have a situation of positive equity where essentially you're getting paid more, you're getting rewarded more than you should. And when most often you talk about negative inequity where it's a situation where you are not getting rewarded as much as you perceive that you should be. And so that's a situation. Of course, when it's equitable is when I compare myself to others, it's kind of the same. We have the same level of output. We get the same level of outcome for the same level of input. And that's seen as an equitable situation. So as I said before, negative inequity, that's kind of the one that we traditionally speak about, is comparison which another person receives greater outcome for similar inputs. I think, hey, we're doing the same thing. We have the same level of, same background. We bring, to the table the same amount, yet you're getting paid more than I. That's negative inequity. Positive inequity, comparison which another person receives lesser incomes for similar inputs. So I said, hey, you know what? I probably shouldn't be paying this much. My colleagues are working the same amount of hours I am. They, have the same education level, and yet I'm getting more. Most times you don't see people, really having problems with positive inequity, but it can actually create a sense of guilt sometimes, and it can have a problematic or a negative effect on the performance. Most times we really are concerned with negative inequity. The study of equity in organizations has kind of branched off and expanded into this area of organizational justice. And when we talk about organizational justice, we talk about the fairness, if you will, of the organization. And it's through three elements of organizational justice. One has to do with distributive justice, and that's how fair do we see the allocation of resources and rewards being. Meaning that, let's take, for example, vacation time. Do we think that some people are getting more vacation time than others, that it's not being distributed fairly, if you will? So that's distributed. How fair is the allocation of resources within the organization? Procedural justice is similar, but a little bit distinctive. It's the fairness of the process and the procedure to make allocation decisions. So, for example, you might think to yourself, hey, you know what, I didn't get as much vacation time as so and so. They got much more than I am. That's not fair. But when you look at the procedure that was used to determine that, it might be situated, seniority. It might have been how much vacation time they took the year before, and so you might see that as being procedurally fair. Although, distributive justice wise, you think, well, hey, I didn't get as much. In that, interactional justice is the third element, and that has to do with the quality of the interpersonal treatment of people. So, how well am I treated? Are people treating me fairly? Are they treating me in such a way that I'm not, it's not inhumane? Am I treated with a level of dignity? That's interactional justice. Well, what are some of the takeaways from equity theory for managers? Well, the first one, as I mentioned before, is that no matter how fair management thinks the policies and the procedures are, no matter how objective they think they are, it's really all about the perception of equity. So you really have to understand the individual. You have to understand to some degree how they think, the types of attitudes they have, the type of personality they might have. And when you're really trying to assess whether or not there is fairness in this policy. So it's not just about setting something that you think, hey, we've clear, it's very transparent, we've used all objective data and all that. That's great. If employees don't perceive it as being fair, then it's going to be problematic. Managers benefit by allowing employees to participate in making decisions about important work, and that's really key to improving both procedural justice and distributive justice. If I feel that I was part of the decision-making process in creating a procedure, or even in terms of allocating resources, then I'll be less resistant to it, and I'll probably think it's fair because I was part of that process. So including individuals in the process obviously helps in terms of increasing justice and equity. And employees should be given opportunity to appeal the decision. So even if you made a decision, employees should have some type of recourse. They shouldn't just have to kind of live with the decisions, because that again gives them a sense of fairness. That if this was, I don't think I feel I was treated fairly. There is some way for me to address this situation. And managers can promote cooperation and teamwork by treating each member essentially equitably. You don't want to treat somebody in a team better than the other person, and then you start getting, this level of anger between each other. A level of vindictiveness might be created because it seems like there is a level of partiality occurring, and you don't want to create that atmosphere in an organization or in teams. Well, we next turn our attention to the second theory of motivation, which is called the expectancy theory of motivation. This was created by a guy called Victor Vroom, and it's really centered around the premise, or the question of how much effort will people put into some type of behavior. And Victor Vroom is trying to explain this by using expectancy theory. It says here, it holds that people are motivated to behave in ways that produce valued outcomes. What does that mean? It means that we are going to be, one, aroused, we're going to be directed, and we're going to be persistent in behaviors and activities that we believe are going to lead to some type of outcome, some type of end state that we would like to see occur. So of course, there are different elements or different relationships in this psychological model, and now we're going to explore those. Well, motivation in Victor Vroom's theory, as I said, it boils down to a decision on how much effort to exert in a specific task. And the first relationship there has to be expectancy. What is expectancy? It represents an individual's belief that a particular degree of effort will be followed by a particular level of performance. What does that mean? I have to believe that if I put a certain amount of effort into an activity, I will get a certain level of performance. So for example, if I start a diet, if I'm motivated to do this diet, I have to really believe that if I do everything that this diet says, I eat right, I exercise, I drink a lot of water, that the more I do that, or the more or the better I do that, the better my performance will be. So I have to believe that there is some type of positive relationship between the effort that I'm exerting and the performance that I will realize. If I do not believe that that is the case, then I will obviously not be motivated to do this. To me, it would just be wasting time. So for example, if I think that, no matter how much I try, I'll never be able to play golf, then I will not be motivated to go out on the golf course or go out on the driver range and practice. It just won't make sense because there will be no expectancy there. Well, what contributes to expectancy? I'll take you back to our chapters before, and you will see some of these being familiar to you. But things like self-esteem, how much do I value myself? How much worth do I place in myself? Self-efficacy, how much confidence do I have in my ability to do something? My previous success at the task, okay, is it something that I've been successful at before? Help received from others, how much are people going to come in and help me to achieve this? Information necessary, good materials, equipment, essentially, how much belief do I have in myself and my abilities is going to improve the level of expectancy. My belief that doing something and doing something well is going to lead to some outcome that I want to see, some performance level that I'm aiming for. Well, in Vroom's model, it's not just expectancy, because remember, it has to be, or your performance has to lead to some kind of outcome, and that relationship is what we call instrumentality, the belief that if I perform at a certain level, I'm going to get a certain outcome. Going back to the example of the diet, I believe that if I stick to the diet, right, if I do everything, then I will achieve the performance of losing 20 pounds. That's the expectancy relationship. But that 20 pounds, I think, is going to lead to the outcome of me dropping 2 pant sizes, and that's an outcome that is going to be realized based on that performance of the 20 pounds. That's the instrumentality. Well, what's this valence about? Well, it's the positive or negative value people place on the outcome. So, do I want to drop 2 pant sizes? I probably do, because maybe I'm going to my class reunion, it's going to make me look great, everybody's going to think how slim and trim I am, and so therefore that's an outcome that I really value. So I'm going to have a high positive valence with respect to that outcome. Think in terms of an organization, okay? So an organization, let's say you achieve a certain sales mark, and because of that sales mark, the outcome is that you get a trip to Hawaii. Okay, and that's something that you've always wanted to do. You've always wanted to go to Hawaii, and that's fantastic. That's a positive valence. Now notice that you can have instrumentality, meaning that you can perform and it can realize an outcome, but you can also have a negative valence associated with that. And that's because you might have, for that sales mark, you might actually get more work the next month. And that's not an outcome that you really treasure. That's going to be a negative valence. What are some of the implications for managers of expectancy theory? Well, you have to recognize that some workers value intrinsic work and recognition more than money. I know that might seem surprising to you, but that's the reality of it. That some people actually want to be challenged at work more so than they want the money. Think about, athletes. A lot of times, especially athletes that have been very, very successful in their career, you're thinking, well, why are they coming back? Right now the U.S. Open's going on, and Roger Federer is the number one in terms of number of majors won, and he's coming back, and he's kind of at the end of his career, and people are saying, well, why are you still playing? Obviously it can't be the money. You have a ton of money already. How much more could you potentially win? Well, I'm sure some of it has to do with the money, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that he just likes playing tennis. He wants to challenge himself. He wants to see if he's still, as good as the rest of the players, and he really wants to see if he can still win a major. So it's the real work rather than the recognition. I'm sorry, rather than the money that in that case is going to be motivated. And then, listen to this, extrinsic rewards can in fact lose their motivating properties over time and may undermine intrinsic motivation. So if I feel, for example, that you're trying to pay me more for doing something that I intrinsically want to do, then that might actually make me want to do it less. And that kind of is almost the starving artist syndrome, where somebody says, I just want to do this for the craft, and if you in fact pay me money, it kind of corrupts it. It kind of makes it sully, and I don't want to do that. So if you pay me more, if you try to create extrinsic motivation, it might actually undermine my desire to do this for my own well-being. Our third motivation theory has to do with goals, and of course you must admit that we're all motivated by our willingness or our desire to achieve something. And of course, those things that we're desiring to achieve are called goals, and they are what an individual is trying to accomplish, or object or aim or action. So our goals are the ones that essentially motivate us, that arouse us, that direct us, and as you will see, that increase our level of persistence in the behavior. Goal theory has been explicitly infused in management by this concept, management by objectives. Maybe you have in your workplace some type of evaluation where you are asked at the beginning of the year, let's say, to sit down with your manager and kind of create some goals or agree upon some goals that you are likely or you will be aiming for in the future. And that's what we do by management by objectives. It says in management system incorporating participating in decision making, goal setting, and feedback. So what happens is the manager kind of sits you down and says, okay, listen, what do you think? Okay, what are we hoping to achieve here in the following year? So you have that chance to participate, give input, make decisions, or help make decisions. You're able to be at that point to have goals set and be part of that goal setting, and then get the feedback from the manager once you have completed the task or once you have completed the goals in terms of how well they will perform, how much or did you achieve in terms of what was said, and what could potentially be done in the future to address any situations, any areas of concern. So management by objectives is really an explicit treatment or explicit incorporation of goal theory or goal setting theory into the management process. Well, how do goals actually motivate us? I mentioned it before. Well, they want direct attention. Definitely, if you have a goal, let's think about you running a race and there is a finish line, a very long race. A lot of people are doing these marathons and all that. Now, they definitely direct your attention. They make you focus in terms of what you need to achieve. They regulate your effort. If you don't have a goal, if you don't have something to actually aim to, you're not likely to feel energetic, you're not likely to feel motivated. And so they regulate your effort, they get you pumped up, they get you enthusiastic about doing. And of course, increase persistence. Okay, that's why you see people and they're in the race and you're thinking, why on earth, if you're so bad, you're feeling so terrible, why don't you just give up? I remember a time when Michael Jordan was playing basketball and he was feeling terribly sick, he was throwing up and all that, and he's like, why don't you just sit down? Why don't you just give up? Well, because he had that goal. He wanted to win that game, and so the persistence was there because there was a goal set. And they foster development application of strategies and plans. Goals require us to think creatively in terms of how we're going to accomplish them. They are definitely influence us, and they motivate us to create plans of actions that will allow us to achieve the goals. And so by setting goals, we then are required to create plans, to create strategies, that are going to allow us to achieve. And so if we don't have goals, we're not likely to undergo, to interact in that type of strategic strategic planning, I should say. Well, how do we actually set goals? First, specific high goals lead to greater performance. So what that suggests to us is that when we're setting goals as managers, we need to ensure that the goals that we're setting are somewhat challenging. They're challenging, but not just that they're challenging, but listen to the specific, goal specific, specificity, I'm sorry, and that is the quantifiability of a goal. You want to give an employee something to aim at, something that they can assess, and you can assess whether they have achieved, and they can assess where they are in terms of achievement along the way. So you don't want to tell an employee, listen, all I want you to do is to do your best. Well, how do I measure that, and how does the employee necessarily know when they have done their best? You want to give them something in terms of, okay, I want to see a 2% increase in your production. That I can quantify, that is specific. Secondly, feedback enhances the effect of specific difficult goals. You want to ensure that you give your employees some type of feedback, some type of information as to how they're doing, as to how to assist them in doing it, so that the goal does not get lost in ambiguity. Many times we've seen before, feedback can actually help us in terms of increasing our intrinsic motivation. So feedback definitely helps when we're setting goals. And third, participative goals, assigned goals, and self-set goals are equally effective. So a lot of times we think, you know what, everybody has to kind of take part in the goal setting agenda. You know, we have to bring people in, we have to ask them. The reality is that, you know, we can have them participate, we can assign them, and we can also have them set their own goals and still see the same benefit. It really depends on the individual and the situation. Fourth, the action planning, I should say, also facilitates goal accomplishment. What that means is that by creating some plan of attack, by giving our employees guidelines, by giving them specific steps to help them in terms of their goal accomplishment, it can definitely increase their motivation level to accomplish the task, because they have reduced, or you have reduced, the level of ambiguity, and you've also provided support in terms of the direction and the guidance that is needed many times in certain goals. It can be a positive and beneficial inclusion to goal setting. And fifthly, goal commitment and monetary incentives. How do they affect goal setting outcomes? If I'm more committed to a goal, I'm more likely to be motivated. Money is a little more controversial. As you said, paying people for performance works sometimes, but that really only is a case where people feel that they are in some way in control of their ability to perform. Well, some practical application of goal setting is essentially, how do we go about setting goals? And the first step is, ironically enough, is to set goals. Don't just leave it to chance. You have to actually go about creating some type of benchmark, some type of objective that you want employees and organizations to actually attain, to accomplish. And you can use things like a time, emotion studies, average, past performance benchmarking, all these different approaches to actually setting some type of objective that an employee and an organization can work towards. And you will see those goals that you set have to follow the acronym that we commonly use called SMART, and we shall actually see that in a few minutes. Well, beyond goals being smart, and we'll look at it in a little bit, two additional recommendations. One, for complex tasks, it says managers to train employees in problem-solving techniques and encourage them to develop a performance action plan. When a task is very complex, you don't just want to assume that employees have the ability to problem solve, that they can think critically about it. You want to essentially help them by prompting, by providing aids that can help in terms of the problem solving, and allowing them and encourage them to have some kind of plan of action to be able to fulfill a complex task. So you just don't want to assume they're going to get it, especially as the difficulty increases, the complexity increases, the more assistance the manager may have to provide. And the second implication of setting goals is that the fact that individual differences does play a part in terms of our goal orientation, or in terms of how or what we want to achieve, then we are likely to have to take this into consideration when we're setting goals, even for employees performing the same job. So because people might have, again, different orientations, different personalities, conscientiousness versus agreeableness, they might have different goal orientations, different levels of intelligence. All these different individual factors can in fact play a part in terms of how people view goals or what motivates them in terms of the goals that are being set. And so a manager may have to consider those individual differences when setting goals, recognizing these goals are really acting as motivators, and therefore we have to ensure that there is a motivating benefit, there is a motivating advantage to the particular goal based on the employee's specific individual makeup. So for example, let's say your employee has more of a learning orientation, a learning goal orientation. You might want to set goals or create goals for them that increases their desire to gain new skills, to utilize new skills in different, more challenging environments. Whereas if you have an employee that's a little more performance oriented, performance goal oriented, you might want to look at creating tasks or creating goals that they can achieve, and in so doing they can demonstrate to themselves and demonstrate to you and others that they have accomplished something. Returning to our SMART acronym, of course we want to follow these guidelines as we write or as we create goals. First, as we mentioned before, they got to be specific. So no just do your best. We need you to have some kind of specific benchmark, some type of specific objective in which to achieve. Of course, they also have to be measurable. You might hear organizations say, we want you to improve customer satisfaction. Well, how are we going to do that? Are we going to do surveys, or are we going to look at people's smiles on their faces? We have to find a way to quantify the goal in such a manner that we can actually determine whether or not it's been attained. Of course, thirdly, attainable. We want to set challenging goals, but we want to ensure that people have the ability to do it. So our goal for myself would not be to beat Usain Bolt in the next Olympics. Yeah, that's very challenging, but highly unattainable. 4, results oriented. We want to make sure that the goals that we're setting are actually going to benefit the organization. There should be some end results that actually lead to some betterment of the organization. And fifthly, time bound. We want to make sure that there is some type of time limit placed on it. So it's not like, well, we want to see an improvement. We want to see a 10% improvement in your productivity, and that's it. No, you want to put some kind of limit. You want to put some kind of deadline, and that again allows us to focus our energy, gives us a sense of urgency, and allows us to also along the process recognize and assess where we are in terms of meeting that final deadline, in terms of meeting that time element. Going back to our goal setting process, step 2, right? Once we've set up goals, we want to make sure that we promote goal commitment. We talked about that again, the relationship between goal commitment and motivation. Involve employees in the goal setting and action planning process. If I feel like I was part of the planning process, I feel that I have some type of active interest in this goal, then I'm likely to stay with it. I'm likely to be more committed because I kind of have ownership of it. And have managers explain the rationale behind higher level goals. A lot of times people are sitting there and they're like, well, why do you really even want me to do this? How would this benefit me? How would this even benefit you? So in order for me to be committed to something, I have to really see the true value and the benefit of actually the entertainment. Going back to Vroom's expectancy theory, we want to see that it's some type of, or there's some type of positive valence associated with a goal accomplishment. In step 3, providing the support and feedback. It says ensure that each employee has the necessary abilities, training, technology, equipment, and information needed to achieve his or her goals. You basically don't want to leave your employees on the island. It's the same thing with students and professors. When we give you assignments, many times we try as best as we can to ensure that you have the training. So for example, when I give you assignments or examinations in this class, I do it after I've done lectures, or after I've taught you, or after I've given you the information, the study guides, to help you, the study notes to help you. That's to ensure that you can more likely attain the goal and do well in the examinations. You don't want to just leave your employees out there. You want to make sure that if they don't have that, they're not going to be highly motivated, because they're going to feel as if they are not able, the self-efficacy won't be there.